And then we'll spotlight me if I can find where it is here. There we go. So you can see. All right, so today it's not a specific pattern I'm tying, although it's close to one that I've seen tied. The whole purpose of today's exercise is to talk about deer hair, about how there's basically two ways to attach deer hair to a hook. One is spinning and the other is stacking. So I just wanted to give you guys a bit of an idea of what I've learned over the years for deer hair. I do a crappy job of trimming. This was my first go, and when I went to trim it, this is supposed to be a wedge-shaped body from point to the back here, and it's supposed to have some deer hair back here. Unfortunately, when I started trimming, you have to. The idea is you trim it flat underneath the hook, and I started by holding the hook upside down, so I trimmed it flat on the top. Oh well, oh well. So this time I did trim it flat on the bottom and got a bit of a ramp shape at the top. But the more important thing is I'm just using this as a platform for showing you some deer hair tying techniques. Another thing in a little pissing around I found is that I used some 3/0 green for this one, and it works okay, but it's not as, you don't get as good a flare with this as you do with this stuff, which is Kevlar. So this is really, really strong, so you can really reef on the deer hair and you can make it stand up straight. So I'm going to use Kevlar. The hook, I'm using a little larger hook than normal, just so that you can see what's going on. You can tie them on smaller, you can tie deer hair on smaller hooks and use smaller bunches of deer hair, but I'm going to give you a good look at the size of clump and see how it looks when it's tied on. So this is a hook that I found when I was down in Bellingham. This is I got them fairly cheap, Daiichi number 4, and I'll tell you that's not a number 4. that's like a number 3, almost a number 2, but it's got a really nice long shank. It's got a turned down eye, which I don't think it much matters. So the first thing I'm going to do is, when you're fishing these deer hair flies, quite often you're fishing them over weed beds. So I'm going to start the thread here right just in front of the point. Because the shank is a little on the slippery side, and I'm going to be tying some monofilament on here as a weed guard, I'm going to wrap that back to the where the barb was on the hook, and then I'll trim it off. That will give something for the monofilament to grab onto when I'm tying it on. So the first thing I'll do is I've got some 20-pound Maxima for the weed guard. And you could probably go a little bit heavier, but the way I tie the weed guard on, you got to be able to get the tippet of the monofilament back through the eye. So I can't go much thicker than that. Just going to take the length of it off here. Now, another little trick I found with mono is, if you want it not to pull out, is I'll take my pair of pliers and I will put them in here and I will flatten about 1/8 of an inch at the end. And then when I lay this down on top of the hook, I will wrap just behind where that flat part is. And then I'll wrap forward. And what that does is that flat part gets bound down a little better than the rest. So it doesn't, there's no way that mono is going to pull out now. I'm just going to bring the mono back and stick it in my spring clip here to keep it out of the way. So the next thing is, I'm going to put a tail on this, because that's the way the Dahlberg divers are supposed to have a tail. And I'm going to take a rabbit strip. It's going to be shank length. I don't want it too long. And use my bodkin to get in here and separate the fur from the rabbit strip, so I have a little place to expose the material to tie it down. I'm going to lay that there, and I'll put the first couple of wraps on so that the fur is on the top and the leather's on the bottom. Get a couple of wraps like that, and I'll come in and just trim this off right there. So I got a little bit of a tail, not too long or it tends to hang down at the back. And I'll scrunch down really good solid wraps to squish that leather down. So far, so good. Make sure it's sitting on top. And to give a little bulk to the back of the fly, I'll do that rabbit strip again. But first I want a teeny bit of flash out the back. So I take a couple of strands of Krystal flash here. And just wrap them around the thread. Like that. Oh, yeah. Being not cooperating today. There we go. Wrap them around the thread. And then I'll tie it on top. And cinch them down. And that just adds a little bit of flash out the back. Just trim it as long as the rabbit. And then I'm going to take the rabbit strip. I'm going to wrap this around the hook shank. And the rabbit strip, when you get these small ones, they tend to have a grain to them. If you look at where the rabbit strip is attached to the leather, where the fur is attached to the leather, it'll usually go one way or the other. It's not straight out because of the way these are cut. And what I want is that when I wrap it, I want it to have the tilted strip to go towards the back. So I need to get the proper end of the rabbit strip. And then I'll come in here and just trim the fur off the leather a bit. And I'll just trim the corners of the leather to give it a teeny bit of a point. And all this does is it just reduces the bulk a little bit. So I just have a little point there. Set that down on top with the strip pointed slightly away from me. And I'll cinch that point down. Bring my thread forward. Didn't grab it. Try again. Go. There. Nice and solid. There we go. He's going to stay there this time. And then as I wrap, I'm going to kind of stroke that fur towards the back. And I'm just going to make a couple of wraps here, just to add a little bulk to the back of the fly. And I will stop when I get even with the point of the hook. And I want to get that all out of there so it's nice and fluffy. Bring my thread up, tie it down. And again, I can use a lot of force to tie that down because this Kevlar really holds up well. And get in here and trim the strip off. And bind it down. I'm not going to leave too much of a bump here because this is where I'm going to do my first deer hair. So there we go. We got a little bit of a fuzzy part here with the tail. That just gives it a little streamlined look. I turn that hook upside down because I'm going to tie the first bit of hair on using the stacking technique. So deer hair, this is reasonably straight stuff. It's got a nice little color to the point. So this is a standard deer hair. And I'm going to take a clump of deer hair that's kind of the same as the width of the hook gap. So kind of like that. Cut it off right tight to the leather on the deer hair. And the first thing I do when I get the deer hair done is I get my fine-tooth comb and hold the deer hair by the tip and get out the fuzzies. This is particularly important when spinning, but it also helps when you're stacking. So I got this nice little clump of deer hair, and I'm going to put it so that there's the deer hair in front is about the same as in half, sort of tying it down in the middle. And I will put that down onto the hook, bring my thread up, got it. And sometimes this Kevlar gets a little floppy and goes forward. I'll bring the thread up, around with my fingers once, twice, once, in between my fingers, down the other side, and give it a slight tug. And when I'm doing this next rip, and when I do the first one, I keep my index finger on the far side of the hook to try and keep the deer hair from spinning around the hook. And then I will cinch the daylights out of it. One more wrap. Cinch the daylights out of it. And you'll see that the deer hair tends to stay on top of the hook and it flares out on both sides. That's the stacking technique. As you'll see, it's pretty much all below where the hook is. So I'm going to do that again with a similar size of clump of deer hair. Maybe this one just a little bit thicker because the point of the hook won't be in the way. And trim that off nice and tight to the leather. And once again, so this is the tedious part of deer hair, is when you get the clump off, you want to get all the fuzzy. So it doesn't flare, and certainly it doesn't spin if there's a lot of fluff in there. So the same thing happens. I will place this so the tips line up with the tips of the last batch, maybe a little longer. And I'll bring my thread up in between my finger and pull it down the far side and just snug it a bit up in between and down the far side. And then I will reef on it. And another wrap, reef again. You see how that all flares the deer hair out. So I've got deer hair on the top and the bottom, and it will go around pretty much in a round shape like that. Take my thumb and finger, and I will slide it back along the shaft of the hook, pushing all that fibers that have gone forward to the back. And at that point, I'll wiggle my thread through the deer hair here so that I can get my thread in front of all the deer hair. And stroke it back. Once I get stroked back a bit so that it's all out of the way, I'll do a couple of wraps in front. And this is the best tool ever for doing deer hair. It's a round disc of plastic with a handle glued to it and different sized holes. And the purpose of this different sized holes is depending on the eye of the hook, you want to be able to get the eye of the hook through those holes. So for this one, the eye of the hook's not pretty big on this guy, so it won't go through the small hole, but the second smallest hole it will. I'm going to take it and I will push back against that deer hair with my fingers behind it so it doesn't slide all the way back on the hook. And I will pack the living daylights out of it. And then I can start applying deer hair in front.
So Dave, back in the days when I first started tying, I used to tie a lot of bass bugs, hair bugs, and my tool of choice back then was the old clear big pens that I would remount the hole a little bit depending on the size of the eye, and that was my compressor.
Yeah, and you can also get a piece that's made out of steel that looks like a nail clipper, but it's got a little notch where the hook is.
Mm-hmm.
So you can clamp down and shove back. The whole idea is, so don't do it with your thumbs and forefinger, because if they slip, you will impale yourself on the point of the hook. Exactly. And that's no fun. So now I got the back stuff here done. So for the belly of the deer hair, let's fly. I'm going to now stack 2 or 3 clumps forward, and one on the bottom and one on the top. And for a white belly, I'm going to use some white deer hair. And I'm going to take that off and it's not quite as long as the brown stuff, so I have to get really down here and get a good chunk. And because I want it underneath, I don't care how long the deer hair is underneath, because I'm going to trim it flat. I can put it down so that it's a little bit less, more hair on the back than on the front. I'm going to put that on there and do the same thing between the fingers. Down. I got to get this right back to the deer hair. Right back there. 1, 2, and then I'm going to hold and pull the daylights out of it. And there we go. I want to make sure this stays on the bottom. This is the stacking technique. And I will come with my packer, slide it in here and push it back. See, that's all on the underside of the hook. The white stuff is all on the underside of the hook. Once again, come in here and push that back. The rest of this body of the fly is going to be green, and I got some decent green deer hair. So the top I'm going to make with the green. And I'm just sort of giving you an idea how this works. So the first bits of stuff that I've done, I've been putting deer hair on the top and bottom of the hook, so that when I trim it, you're going to have just white on the bottom and not white on the top, green on the top. And again, I'm going to put it there, get my deer hair out of the way. 1, gently, 2, gently, sure at the top of the hook, and pull like that. So now I got green on the top and white on the bottom. Yeah. Push it back. And now you can see there is a definite segregation between what's on the bottom and what's on the top. And that's the whole point of stacking, is by stacking, you can put the trimmed deer hair of the color you want on the sides. Or if you get really fancy and you want to put spots on a frog, you can do smaller clumps and end up with some spots on the side and colors on the top. You can get pretty creative with how you make the body look. So Then again, I'll do this once more with the white underneath. And again, I don't worry about too much the length of the white underneath because I'm going to trim that fairly short. So this will have a fairly good chunk. And you're not seeing what I'm doing down there, but I'm again basically taking the fuzz out of the bottom. Bring my thread forward a bit. That down there. 1, 2, yeah. This Kevlar is really great for this. And push it back. Packed it some more. So far, what we've been doing is stacking deer hair. And I'll do a stack on top, and then we'll do a spin. Once again, that's not very far back yet. I need to get that back pretty good. I need to get my thread in front of all that weight. That's one of the issues with the good part and the bad part of the Kevlar is that the Kevlar will slide around the hook shank when you're pushing it back, whereas the standard thread tends to bind to the hook shank, and it's not quite as good. And flare, one more flare, push it all back. And then bring my thread forward. A couple more wraps. And shove it back. And when I pack it good like that, it just keeps exposing more shanks so I can put more stuff on. All right, so now I'm going to show you how to spin the deer hair. This will be the green again. And this one I'm going to take a fairly decent chunk because it's got to cover all the way around the hook. So it's going to be thicker than the last one. Sizable chunk of deer hair. I'm going to get the fuzz out. Set it back on the hook. Make sure that thread is a little bit forward. And this time I'll do, again, a couple of wraps around. 1, 2. But instead of pinning it with my fingers when I start to tighten, I will let it go, and I'll use the thread as I pull to push the deer hair around the shank. And as I push, I'll tighten. And you go a few good wraps through there. And now you'll see the deer hair is distributed all the way around the hook shank. So that's the spinning process. And I have enough room that I can probably get another one on here. Lots of quiet here while I'm busy shoving, getting it organized and getting it pushed back nice and firmly on the rest of the hook shank. Bring my thread in front. I'm going to give it a bit of a yellow nose here, just for fun. And once again, this will be spun on. so it goes all the way around. And because this is going to be a pointy nose, I don't need quite as long a deer hair or quite as thick a clump. But this yellow stuff has more fuzz in the bottom, so I gotta make sure I get that out. Put that in here. Thread around once, twice, and then I will cinch it as I go around, and it spins. It distributes pretty evenly around the hook shank if I do it right. And once again, I will shove all this stuff back. I need a little bit of shank in front because I've got to make a bit of a head, and I want to be able to tie down the monofilament that I'm using as a monofilament I'm using as a weed guard. So once I get all that stuff back, I will make sure I pull it all back nice and clean. A couple of wraps in front of there, and just make sure I get it really pushed right back. Now, in order to trim this, I want to trim it before I put the weed guard on. So I'll do a whip finish at the end here. And there we go. This thread is a little harder to cut. All right. There we go. Now, the fun starts. This is where you start trimming. And this is sitting right over top of my basket that catches waste. Make sure the weed guard's out of the way. Now, to trim, you get these straight edged razor blades. And when I've looked at some of these guys doing it online, what they do is they take the razor blade and they hold it in their hands. But man, that runs the risk of cutting your finger to shreds. So there is this tool made by Stonko. And it holds the razor blade. And you slip the standard straight razor blade into this guy here. And it holds it steady with your fingers well out of the way. And you can make it curve by rotating this part here. And you can actually curve the blade to the shape you want. So I'm going to just undo it a bit because I want a straight blade. And I'm going to go in here and feel where the shank of the hook is. And I make it parallel to the shank. And I could get in here with my razor blade and just wiggle it a little bit back through the deer hair until I get to where the white is. And you'll see I've trimmed it flat. So I'm going to do that again. Trim it right back parallel to the shank of the hook, all the way back to where the gray or the brown fur is, the brown deer hair is. And just that's right where the point is, right about there. And I want to get this pretty much flat with the hook shank. Just a little bit tighter there. So this is what takes your time, is you take a lot of time to spin the deer hair, and then you got to trim the sucker. And once I get where the brown deer hair is, I'm going to stop because I want that to shroud the hook a little bit. The next thing I want to do is the top. And for this, I'm going to spin this thing and give it a nice curve to it. You can bend this a pretty fair amount, actually. I'm going to come right from the eye, and I'm going to angle up towards where the long part of the hair is. And just, again, square to the hook shank as much as I can. And just gently go through here, wiggling back and forth with the razor blade. I don't need to chat. This requires a little concentration. I don't want to cut it too short. So it's better to take multiple passes. And I want to get the shape from the eye of the hook towards the back to be kind of a wedge shape. That's part of the business of these divers, is the idea is to have them so that when you pull them through the water, they tend to want to pull the point of the hook down, and the hair will set up the top. Do the same thing from the sides, because I kind of want a wedge-shaped body here. So I'll do the same thing. Bring it from tight at the front and trim upwards as I go to the back. And if I just do it carefully, and I want to be kind of symmetric, so I'm going to come from here. And as I get a lot of the long pieces of deer hair out, you'll begin to see that wedge shape better. Trying to do my best to make it relatively smooth and nice even taper. Now that I can see what I'm doing, I can go at it with a little more vigor. And again, I'm going to try and stop as I get to the brown stuff, because I want that skirt at the back a bit. So you can see I've got a pretty good sort of tapered torpedo shape there. Just a little bit more off the bottom here. Get it kind of flat. Now that I have got the basic body shape, I'm going to take my scissors and go in behind and pull some of this forward a bit. Because what I want to do is I want to expose the brown hair that has no white tips on it. And I'll slide my scissors in right behind and trim it vertically, just the brown hair that doesn't have any, because I'm laying my scissors down on the deer hair has the white tips, and trim just the brown stuff and the green stuff off from the back. So you see I'm now starting to expose just leaving long just the hair that has the white tip on it. And I'm creating a little bit of a gap here between the back part of the fly and the head. So this is always a little finicky. And I'll do that with the green stuff as well. I'm going to cut that vertically right at the back here. Hey, this trimming is going much better than the last couple. And then I'm just going to trim these off, right? So you get a little bit of a crest on here. Still a few bits of brown here. So you can see now I got some brown back there, and I've got a nice torpedo shape here. And I'll just tidy that up. Now you see the results of stacking on the bottom. I get a kind of a white belly and a green top. That's what you can do with stacking, is you can create these mottled appearances with stacked deer hair. If you get really good at this and you work with smaller quantities of deer hair, you can create little spots and lines on them. It seems like the trimming never ends. Okay, that's probably as good a place for the moment. Now, I've got with this vise, I'm fortunate. I have a little hole back here between where the hook is held and the jaws of the vise. So what I can do is I can take my mono and I can shove it down through this hole. Get in there. I'm having trouble seeing this today. Come on. There. Poop. Come on, go through there. Having trouble getting my fingers to work. There we go. Down through the hole. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it up through the eye. There we go. And then I take my Kevlar thread. I should want to do the Kevlar before I put the mono through the eye. Reattach the Kevlar. Take the end of the Kevlar off. And then I'm going to shove this up through the eye. And it's always tough to get this little piece when you're working in close quarters. Come on, go through the eye. Come on. There we go. Okay, got it through the eye. And I'm going to pull it so it just clears the point. Hold it there and give 3 or 4 really good wraps here. And that cinches the mono in place. And then what I do is I take the tip and I go back through the eye. It's always taking way too long. Oh, that pulled it right back through. Give another couple of wraps of Kevlar, and then I can trim the mono off, the tag end off, and build a little bit of a head behind the eye. And whip finish. Now this mono is a little bit, sorry, this Kevlar is a little bit slippery, and I don't want that weed guard to pull out. So once I cut off the Kevlar, I'm going to take just a dab of super glue and just give a little dab of that there. And that's it. There's my Dahlberg diver.
Very nice, Dave.
Thank you very much, Dave.
So that's a very complicated fly, but it gives you an idea of the different techniques that you need to be able to play with deer hair.
So a bass fly?
Yeah, anything that is going to feed something on the surface. I think this would be a killer pike fly, actually. You get that out there and create a bunch of surface disturbance, and pike will go crazy for it. I think they like things that are make a disturbance and are trying to get away.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Dave, have you ever considered using nano silk instead of Kevlar?
Yeah, no, I haven't. I don't know what the quality of the Kevlar is. With regular silk, because it tends to grab the material, it doesn't spin as nice. So I find that the Kevlar, and you can get Kevlar in different weights. The one I have there is kind of a heavyweight Kevlar, but you can get a lighter weight Kevlar, and you can get it in different colors. This one is a kind of a braided one. Not straight braided. It's a flat, so you can spin it to tighten it up if you want, and it goes quite. But I didn't spin it because I didn't want to cut the deer hair when I was reefing on it really hard. So you could probably use it nano silk, but because the Kevlar is slippery, it spins a little better, I think.
Yeah, nano silk is pretty slippery as well.
Yeah.
I found that if you use the thicker stuff like the 100 diameter,
Yeah,
it works pretty good.
good.
And
Yeah,
you can flatten it when you need to and spin it up. It's to my mind, it's a very expensive thread for what you get.
Yeah,
but it's very strong.
Yeah, and that's the point of the Kevlar is you could reef on the Kevlar as hard as you want, and you'll not break the thread.
Yeah.
Whereas with regular thread, even for 1/0 or 3/0, you really reef on it to try and get that hair, compacted hair, to spin, and it will just break. But with this, so you can also shape this a little more. You can make a little fancier shape in the front if you want. But I think that broad looking front with a taper like that, when you strip it, it's going to cause a lot of disturbance on the water surface. Anyway, the main point of that was to show.
The tool holding the razor blade.
It's made by Stonco, Stonco. Here so you can see it.
Okay, gents, I need to get going, so stay dry, and
All right.
see you soon. Tight lines. Bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah, so this is a really good little tool, and it will definitely save your fingers. I think I've seen a couple of people use it before, and I really like the way it handles the razor blade. You can see it keeps you from nicking yourself. I have enough trouble with a regular razor blade when I'm shaving. You know, I mean, that's what this is. This used to be the old double-edged razor blade, right? The old double cutter. Okay, you're on. Florin?
Where is Florin?
I'm gonna stop my spotlight here.
You can see my vice. That's where I am.
Ah, okay.
There you go.
Now, for the easy fly, I promise I'll do this on time and under budget. Just regular olive thread. This is 8/0, so I don't worry about how many turns of thread I do. And size 12 hook, but it's, you know, size 12 is kind of doesn't mean much anymore these days. It's size 10 from other manufacturers. It would be a size 8 by others. Whatever. Hook of a size that is pleasing to your eye and feels right for your intended application. So what
Florin,
I'm
is that a
doing-
circle hook?
No, it's not a circle hook. It's where's my bag here? This is a trout bum hook. I believe it's from this packet. Okay. And it says 12 on it, and they have a little bit of an upturned point. And they're they're relatively heavy wire. Okay, I'm going to get a little bit of Marabou for tail. So I'm going to strip a little bit off this feather, a little clump. So the Marabou is going to make tail and shellback on this fly. And in order to have a little bit of control over this Marabou, I'm going to get, so this is what the clump looks like. And I'm going to get my fingers wet and get some of that moisture into the Marabou. This way, I'll be able to sort of keep it from going all over the place to some extent. It's not perfect, but okay. So I'm going to put in a bit of a tail here. I can always pinch the tail shorter if I want. So I'm going to err a little bit on the long side. I'm going to do this one pretty much shank length. And attach it and secure it here properly. I'm going to fold this back. This is all going to get covered, so it's not a problem. By the way, if you have issues with the Marabou kind of getting fouled in the hook, just do a couple of turns of thread underneath the tail, and that's going to push the tail up a little bit. Next ingredient, I'm going to get a little bit of wire, which is fine gold wire. The original recipe calls for ribbing underneath the shellback, but I'm going to rib on top to make it a little stronger. And then I need some hackle. And for the hackle, you can use whatever you happen to have that's small enough. The original recipe calls for some orange. I have also some pink. The orange hackle that I have is not small enough, so I tied a few with pink. They come out quite nice, but this one I'm going to tie here. I saved one of the smaller pieces of hackle that I had that is orange, and I'm going to use that to tie this fly. So just attach it here at the back. Okay, nice and secure. And then for the body, you can use whatever you like. You can use dubbing, you can use chenille, you can use peacock curl, whatever. I'm going to go this time to enhance the orange. I'm just going to go with this sort of orangey, relatively fine size crystal chenille. So I'm going to unravel a little bit from the card and then just secure it here in the notch. This way it doesn't go anywhere, and I have enough to tie my fly. I secure this as well. And bring the thread forward. Now it's just a matter of wrapping the chenille, which I'm going to do using the rotary vise. A few turns, doesn't need too much. You get to the end here, just make sure that your thread stays forward at the chenille. And then 2 or 3 turns to secure the thread in front and trim. Next goes the hackle. And for this, in order to get a little bit better control, I'm going to use hackle pliers. So here, and the other thing is if you want your hackle fibers to be coming out sort of nice and orderly, one thing you can do is you can, although this is pretty much dry fly hackle grade, you can still fold it to some extent. So get your fingers wet. A little pot of water, as I showed you last time, is very handy for this. And keep wrapping while stroking those fibers back. And that's going to give you reasonably nice and even. The stem may want to turn on you. You can try to force it to turn your way. It doesn't always work. Let me see, which way am I turning now? Okay, happy about this. I'm gonna unravel a few turns and go back here. Let's see what happened. Okay. The end, don't crowd the head, so leave just a tiny little bit of room there because we still have the shellback and the wire to put on. So secure the hackle. Again, I like 3 turns here to be on the safe side. Move the thread ahead and then trim. Okay, now we're coming to the business of the shellback, which got a little bit dry in the meantime. So I'm going to get my fingers wet again. I'm going to get this a little bit moist, and then I'm going to use my wet fingers as well at the same time to push those hackle fibers down. You could trim them on top if you want a sparser look. If you want a bushier look, you can keep the entire hackle. This is how you do sometimes throats, salmon flies and stuff. You wind the hackle and then you push all the fibers down and then you get a nice throat. Okay, so this is attached. Now, the problem here that you're gonna have to be mindful about is this shellback is only attached at the back and at the front. So you want to leave this here so you can control this a little bit. If you cut this, you may find out that once you put the wire through, that will be pulling on your Marabou and it might just pull the front from its thread wraps there. So I'm going to leave that hanging over the eye of the hook until I'm done. And now I start with the wire. And now I just want to wiggle this a little bit and tighten carefully on my side rather than on the other side to prevent the shellback from rotating on me. And then push these things down. And as you can see, I should have had even smaller hackle, and that's why I did a few with that pink, because I have a reasonably small size. Okay, so now that I have this all the way up front, I do one more turn of wire right behind the bead, as you can see here. And then secure this with a thread. This is relatively fine thread, and this is relatively strong wire. You'll find that copper is usually more pliable and it breaks off more easily. Gold wire is pretty tough stuff. Anyway, managed to break it off. And now I'm just going to trim my marabou and do a couple of whip finishes. Again, I'm going to try not to see, there are a few stray hairs here that I can snip away before finishing it off. Again, if this is sticking in too many directions, get a little bit more water here, get this wet, push those fibers back and out of your whip finish. Make sure that the space here behind the bead is properly filled up. This one, for some reason, I think I left a little too much space here. That's a bit. It's a bit of a gap there that I didn't intend to have. Okay. All right. Take my whip finish tool and one whip finish right behind the bead. Two whip finishes. That's the trick. Since your knots are well protected behind the bead, and should you get to have this fly unravel for you, it's probably a good thing, because that means you caught way too many fish with it. Let me see. Stray hackle fibers. Okay. They're gone. There's a few here. Okay. No, the rest looks kind of okay. And that's the Stillwater Nymph in the orange version. I've tied earlier a few with pink hackle. I'll just show you what they look like. I think they're pretty nice fishy colors. You can see the hackle is a better size for it. And I also used the matching chenille here. That's in a kind of a light, nice pink. And that's that. That's the Stillwater Nymph. And you can vary basically the colors. You can use different color marabou for the shellback. You can use, I would use pheasant tail as well for the shellback. And the other thing that I would be, I'll be trying is peacock bodies as well. So peacock curl and the hackle of whatever color. And it's also possible to do this without hackle. You can use blob stuff that works well. It gives you, you just have to make sure you don't use too much of it, because then it gets too dense. So just spiral it around nicely. The other thing that works well is this straggle hackle, which also has a fair bit of sparkle in it. So there are many possible variants. Here's one where I dropped a shellback and I combined straggle hackle with blob and put a bit of sparkle in the tail as well. So you can take this and play with it and kind of come up with different variations. And that's that.
Good.
And as promised, it's before 12. well, 11 for you.
So Florin, how do you fish it?
Like any nymph, cast and strip. Pause, go slower, go faster, go intermediate, go deeper, go floating near the weeds, tight in damselish colors, and sorry, you know, do different things with it. Use it instead of where you would be normally using a woolly bugger, and you think that's too big, which I many times happen to do. And I'm always looking for something a little smaller, and I think this would probably fit the bill.
Florin, we quite can't see you right now, but could you please hold up that package of hooks again?
Yes, I will go back to the document camera so you can actually see the hooks. So it's a 5262 BL long shank size 12.
That's great. I got a picture of it now. Thank you.
Yeah, so trout bum is the source of these hooks.